I'm standing in the middle of what used to be my sanctuary, the smell of diesel fuel and crushed azaleas thick in the air, looking at the tread marks that desecrated the only holy ground I have left on this earth. And in that moment, something inside me that I thought was long dead and buried snapped back to life with a terrifying jolt. It wasn't anger, not the hot, messy kind that makes your hands shake and your voice crack, but something much colder, something reptilian and precise, a familiar stillness that settles over you when the mission parameters are set and the rules of engagement have just shifted from civilian life to a combat zone. They didn't just trespass or vandalize. They tried to erase the memory of the woman who saved my soul, and they did it with the arrogant sneers of men who have never faced consequences in their entire privileged lives. I knew right then, standing amidst the ruin of 20 years of love and labor, that I was going to systematically dismantle their world piece by piece, using every terrifying skill Uncle Sam spent millions teaching me, and I didn't care if I burned down right along with them. Before I tell you exactly how I waged a one-man war against an entire corrupt town hierarchy, I need you to look at the situation I was put in and ask yourself truly, if someone took the most precious thing you had left, trampled it into the dirt, and laughed in your face while the law looked the other way, would you have just rolled over and taken it? Or would you have done what I did? To understand why things went as far as they did, you need to understand who I was before I became the quiet old guy at the end of the dirt road. My name, for the purpose of this story, is Elias, and for 25 years my life belonged to the United States military, specifically units that don't officially exist and missions that never happened. I have a chest full of medals hidden in a shoebox at the bottom of my closet: silver stars, purple hearts, a Navy Cross, metal trinkets given in exchange for pieces of my soul and the gallons of blood I saw spilled in deserts and jungles across the globe. When I finally got out, I was hollowed out, a walking ghost haunted by the faces of the friends I couldn't save and the enemies I had to put down. I came back to the States looking for a place to either heal or die quietly. I wasn't sure which, and that's when I met Sarah. She was a landscape architect with dirt under her fingernails and a smile that could stop a tank convoy, and she saw past the 1,000-yard stare and the jumpiness. She didn't try to fix me. She just loved me, and piece by piece, she built a garden around the wreckage of my life until I could breathe again. We bought 40 acres in a small, forgotten town tucked away in the mountains, a place where the cell service was spotty and people minded their own business. We spent 15 beautiful years there, turning that rough land into a paradise, her paradise. When cancer took her 3 years ago, that land and the elaborate gardens she designed became my church, my therapy, and my sole connection to her. I spent every day maintaining it exactly as she left it, talking to her while I pruned the roses and weeded the vegetable patches. I was a harmless, grieving old man just wanting to be left alone to run out the clock. Then the developers showed up. It started with a knock on the door about 6 months ago. A slick young guy in a suit that cost more than my truck, driving a shiny black SUV, introduced himself as Carter Vance, representing Apex Horizon Development. He had that shark-like grin of someone used to hearing yes. He laid out a plan to buy my 40 acres, along with the surrounding properties they'd already snapped up, to build some high-end eco-luxury resort for city people who wanted to pretend they were roughing it while sipping $20 lattes. He offered me double what the land was worth on paper. I didn't even invite him in. I just told him the land wasn't for sale at any price, that my wife's ashes were scattered in the rose garden, and that I intended to die right here. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes went dead. the mask slipping for just a second to reveal the spoiled brat underneath. He gave me a speech about progress and how I shouldn't stand in the way of the town's economic future, handing me his card with a warning that this was the easy way, offer. I crumbled the card and tossed it on the ground near his polished Italian loafers, telling him to get off my property. That was the first shot fired, though I didn't realize it at the time. A week later, the harassment began, subtle things at first, designed to make me uncomfortable, to needle me into selling. Drones started buzzing over my property at all hours, hovering over my house, watching me while I worked in the garden. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning to the sound of high-powered spotlights shining directly into my bedroom windows from the ridgeline overlooking my property, just far enough away that I couldn't identify the vehicles. Then the physical damage started. I woke up one morning to find 50 yards of my perimeter fence cut, my 2 rescue dogs barking frantically at the gap. A few days later, I went into town for groceries and came back to find all 4 tires on my truck slashed in my own driveway. I knew exactly who was behind it. I drove into town on the rims. I've driven vehicles in worse shape under fire, and went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Grady was a beefy man with a bloated face and eyes that always seemed to be looking for an exit. He'd been helpful enough when Sarah died, but as I laid out the photos of the drones, the cut fence, and my slashed tires, I could see the dismissal in his posture. He leaned back in his chair, cleaning his fingernails with a paperclip, and told me that without concrete proof of who did it, there wasn't much he could do. He suggested it was probably just local kids causing trouble, and then, with a sickeningly fake tone of concern, said, "You know, Elias, you're getting up there in years, living all alone out there on that big property. Maybe it's getting too much for you to handle. Mr. Vance is offering a lot of money. It might be time to consider a retirement community." The message was loud and clear. Grady was bought and paid for by Apex Horizon. I was on my own. The realization that the law was against me didn't scare me. It clarified things. It brought back a familiar operational mindset. I stopped going to town unless absolutely necessary. I reactivated old security protocols I hadn't used since Baghdad. I set up trail cameras along the perimeter, tripwires with flares in the dense woods behind the house, and I started sleeping in shifts, my old service pistol under my pillow. The tension was palpable, a thick fog hanging over the sanctuary Sarah had built. I felt like I was back in a forward operating base, waiting for the mortar attack to start. The psychological pressure was intense, designed to break an old man, but they misunderstood who they were dealing with. They thought they were pressuring a lonely widower. They didn't know they were waking up a dormant predator. I tried to maintain my routine, pruning the azaleas and watering Sarah's prized hydrangeas, but every snap of a twig made me reach for the small of my back. I was angry, yes, but more than that. I was profoundly sad that the peace Sarah had died trying to give me was being shattered by greed. The breaking point came last Tuesday. I had a mandatory appointment at the VA hospital 3 hours away for a checkup on some old shrapnel injuries. I hated leaving the property unguarded, but I had no choice. I locked everything up tight, set the alarms, and left at dawn, the dread heavy in my gut the entire drive. The appointment ran long, and by the time I made it back up the winding mountain road to my driveway, the sun was already setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the land. As soon as I turned onto my gravel lane, I knew something was deeply wrong. The gate was torn off its hinges, twisted metal lying in the ditch. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a dreadful anticipation. I sped up, the truck bouncing violently over the ruts, and rounded the final bend that opened up to the house and the main gardens. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt in the gravel, and I just sat there, staring, unable to process the scene. They hadn't just vandalized it, they had annihilated it. A massive yellow bulldozer sat abandoned in the middle of what used to be Sarah's rose garden, its giant blade resting on a crushed stone bench where we used to sit and watch the sunset. The gazebo she had designed herself, the centerpiece of the entire property, was splintered kindling. The delicate Japanese maples she had nurtured from saplings were snapped in half. The irrigation system was ripped out of the ground like exposed veins. It looked like a bomb had gone off. The air reeked of raw earth and diesel fumes. I stepped out of the truck, my legs feeling numb, and walked into the carnage. I fell to my knees in the dirt where the roses used to be, my hands sifting through the ruined soil, finding pieces of the ceramic markers she had painted for each variety. This wasn't just property damage. This was a spiritual assault. They had taken the only thing I had left of her and violently raped it with heavy machinery. I sat there in the dirt as the sun went down, the silence of the destroyed garden ringing in my ears. I remembered Vance's sneering face, Sheriff Grady's dismissive shrug. They thought this would break me. They thought this would send me packing, crying in defeat. They had absolutely no idea what they had just done. I stood up as darkness fell. The grief that had threatened to overwhelm me moments ago evaporated, replaced instantly by that cold, familiar clarity. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing slowed down. The civilian part of me, the husband Elias, stepped back into the shadows, and the operator stepped forward. I walked back to the house, which they had miraculously left untouched probably to avoid bigger felony charges, and went straight to the basement. Behind a false wall in the pantry was a heavy steel door. I punched in the combination, a sequence of numbers I hadn't thought of in years, and the bolts clacked open. Inside was a small concrete room, temperature controlled, holding the tools of my past trade. I hadn't opened this room since I moved here. I hoped I never would have to. The smell of gun oil and preserved metal hit me. On the wall, racks hung things that aren't supposed to be in civilian hands. A suppressed MP5, a long-range precision rifle, night vision goggles, thermal optics, encrypted communication gear, and boxes of specialized ammunition. I looked at the collection, feeling the weight of it, the terrible potential. I wasn't going to murder them. That would be too easy, and it wasn't the mission. The mission was total neutralization of the threat. They wanted a war. They wanted to use force to take what was mine. Okay. I would speak their language, but with a vocabulary they couldn't even comprehend. So that's the situation I was in, standing in an underground bunker looking at an arsenal. My wife's legacy destroyed outside by greedy cowards who hid behind a corrupt badge. I had to make a choice right then about how far I was willing to go. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below. If you were in my shoes, if they took the one thing that mattered to you and the law wouldn't help, would you have walked away, or would you have opened that locker? I spent the next 4 hours preparing. I cleaned the weapons, checked the optics, and loaded magazines with a practiced, rhythmic efficiency. I put on dark, non-reflective tactical gear, slipping into it like a second skin. I painted my face, obscuring the old man and highlighting the predator. I strapped on the night vision, the world turning into a crisp green monochrome. I was 60 years old, my knees ached in the rain, and I had a bad back, but tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, I was 20, 5 again, and I was hunting. Phase 1 was intelligence. I knew they wouldn't be expecting anything tonight. They'd expect me to be crying in my ruined garden. I slipped out of the house like a shadow, moving through the woods using cover and concealment instinctively. I made my way toward the edge of town where Apex Horizon had set up a temporary construction headquarters in a double-wide trailer surrounded by heavy equipment. It was about 2 miles away through dense forest. When I got close, I used my thermal optics. There were 3 heat signatures inside the trailer, and 2 outside patrolling lazily hired security, probably ex-cops or low-level thugs nursing coffees. I crept closer, setting up a listening post in a drainage ditch 50 yards out. Using my high-gain directional microphone, I picked up their conversation through the thin walls of the trailer. It was Vance, Sheriff Grady, and another man I didn't recognize, probably the foreman who ran the bulldozer. They were laughing, congratulating themselves. I heard Grady say, "Did you see the look on the old bastard's face when we told him we couldn't do anything about the tires? He's probably packing his bags right now." Vance laughed, the sound grating in my headset. "Yeah, the dozer was a nice touch. Message received, loud and clear. We'll have that deed by Friday." They were toasting with whiskey. They felt completely safe, protected by their money and their badges. Phase 2 was isolation and psychological degradation. I needed them terrified before I ever showed my face. I circled around to the back of the lot where their personal vehicles were parked, Vance's shiny black SUV and Grady's patrol car. I didn't slash the tires this time. I crawled underneath and used a small, specialized tool to disable the brake lines and fuel pumps in a way that wouldn't be immediately obvious, but would ensure they weren't leaving. Then I located the main power feed to the trailer, a thick cable running from a temporary pole. I planted a small, remote, detonated charge at the base of the pole. Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to kill the lights. Then I went to work on the outside guards. I didn't want to kill them. They were just hourly muscle. I used a technique involving a thrown rock to distract the first one, drawing him away from his partner into the shadows of a parked excavator. As he rounded the corner, I stepped out from behind the tracks. He never even saw me. A quick, precise strike to the carotid artery dropped him unconscious before he could make a sound. I tied his hands and feet and dragged him under the machine. I repeated the process with the second guard, who came looking for his buddy 10 minutes later. Now the perimeter was clear. The 3 men inside were alone. I moved to the trailer door. I could still hear them laughing inside. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and triggered the detonator. A sharp crump sound outside, followed immediately by the trailer plunging into pitch blackness. The laughter cut off instantly, replaced by shouts of confusion. "What the hell was that?" Grady yelled. "Get the backup generator," Vance screamed. I heard them fumbling around in the dark, chairs scraping against the floor. I waited. I wanted the fear to marinate. I wanted them to feel the sudden shift in power. I let them stumble around for a full 2 minutes before I made my move. I kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a crash that sounded like a thunderclap in the small space. I stepped inside, a towering silhouette, wet in the doorway, the green glow of my night vision goggles looking like demonic eyes in the darkness. I hit the strobing tactical light attached to my rifle. The intense, blinding flashes disoriented them completely. "Police, freeze!" Grady yelled, instinctively going for his gun, but he was blinded, stumbling over a fallen chair. "Drop it, Grady," I said, my voice modified by the tactical headset into a low, gravelly growl that didn't sound human. "You have no authority here. This is a combat zone." The sheer terror in the room sucked the air out of it. They froze. Vance was cowering behind a desk, shielding his eyes. The foreman was pressed against the far wall, shaking. Grady paused, his hand hovering over his holster. I said, "Drop it." I repeated, leveling the red dot of my laser sight directly on his chest. The sight of that red dot, combined with my appearance and the voice, broke him. He slowly pulled his hand away from his weapon and raised them in the air. "Who are you? What do you want?" Vance stammered from behind the desk, his voice high and reedy. "I'm the lion you poked," I said, stepping fully into the room. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The quiet, controlled menace was far more terrifying. I tied Grady first, disarming him and tossing his piece across the room. Then the foreman, then Vance. I sat them in 3 chairs in the middle of the room. I pulled off my night vision goggles so they could look at me, see the face of the helpless old man they had tormented. The recognition hit Vance like a physical blow. His jaw dropped. "Elias," he whispered. "But you're a gardener." "I was a lot of things before I was a gardener, Mr. Vance," I said softly, leaning in close so he could smell the gun oil on me. "And you just reminded me of all of them. I didn't hurt them physically. I didn't need to. I spent the next hour dismantling their lives." I grabbed Vance's laptop. It was password protected, but military. Grade cracking software on a USB drive took care of that in 5 minutes. I found everything. Emails detailing bribes to county commissioners, the payoffs to Sheriff Grady, blueprints for illegal environmental bypasses, communication with the thugs they hired to vandalize my property. It was all there, a roadmap of their corruption. I copied everything to an external encrypted drive. Then I turned to Grady. I pulled out his own handcuffs and ratcheted them tight. "You betrayed your oath, Grady," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You used the law as a weapon against a citizen you were sworn to protect because this punk waved some cash at you. You're disgraceful." He just looked at the floor, defeated. As dawn started to break, I made a phone call. Not to the local cops, but to a contact I hadn't spoken to in a decade, a man now high up in the FBI. I told him I had a domestic terrorism situation involving corruption of public officials and major corporate fraud, wrapped up with a bow and ready for pickup. When the black SUV and state police cruisers swarmed the construction site an hour later, led by federal agents, I handed over the encrypted drive and the 3 zip-tied prisoners. The look on the lead agent's face when he saw the scene, 3 grown men, absolutely terrified of one old retired vet in full battle rattle, was priceless. He just nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement between professionals. The aftermath was swift and brutal for them. Vance and his entire company are buried under federal indictments that will keep them in court and eventually prison for the rest of their lives. Grady is already serving time, stripped of his badge and pension. The development project was totally scrapped, the land seized by the state as evidence. As for me, I wasn't charged. The feds saw the evidence of what they did to my property, the clear self-defense nature of my actions, and given my service record and the fact that I didn't actually hurt anyone, they decided it was in everyone's best interest to just let the eccentric old war hero go back to his farm. It's been 3 months now. I'm rebuilding the garden. It will never be exactly what Sarah made, but that's okay. It's going to be something new, something stronger. I planted a new rose bush right where the bulldozer sat. Every time I dig in the dirt now, I feel a different kind of peace. It's not the naive peace of someone hoping to be left alone. It's the secure peace of someone who knows exactly what they are capable of doing to protect their sanctuary. I put the medals back in the closet, and I locked the steel door to the basement room again. The lion is back asleep, but now the whole world knows he's there, and they know exactly why you should never, ever poke him. If you think I did the right thing by standing up to those bullies and defending Sarah's memory using the only language they understood, hit that like button. It lets me know I wasn't crazy for doing what I did. If you want to hear more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve when they cross the wrong person, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. And seriously, I want to know what you think down in the comments. Did I go too far, or did the punishment fit the crime? Let's talk about it down there. I'll see you all in the next story.